Matt Bracken, Ian Burlingame, thanks for doing this. And I didn't realize this is the first time you guys have ever talked on a show or in video or via Zoom.
Or at all.
Yeah, we've just kicked links back and forth, and
Yeah. Yeah, I've been doing the prep work, the IPB,
What's the
the
IPB?
intelligence preparation of the battlefield.
Well,
Yeah.
that's why I like having you guys both on because you guys prepare me for all this. Well, it's
at least now we won't have to define GWAT.
Yeah.
That's
glo-
an
glo-
inside joke.
global war on
Yeah.
terror. Thank you.
Inside joke.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn over to you guys to say where do you want to start with all this? Should we start with last night, the speech?
I
What do
was
you
just
guys?
disappointed looking from well, it doesn't matter. I was just disappointed that the one side didn't assault across the other side and throw down.
Yeah, the Mr. Brown from Georgia was waving his cane like he wanted to go antebellum there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I thought it would have been great if he had like thrashed the master at arms,
It
and
would
there
have
could
been
have been a
great
real brawl.
if dueling was still legal and he and someone from the other side could have gone out and dealt with their umbrage in the old ways.
Well, that was an echo from the pre-civil pre-Civil War era because there were cane fights, and
Yeah,
people
yeah,
getting
yeah,
thrashed
yeah.
and beaten in Congress. So I think he was trying for it. But in the pre-Civil War South, he probably would not have been in Congress. In the Reconstruction South, he probably would have. So I like his cane though with the gold grip. And in Florida where I live, a lot of the concealed carry states try to outdo each other. DeSantis is going for open carry. We already have constitutional carry, so you don't need a
Perfect.
CCW card in your
Yeah.
wallet. But in Florida, even the law is that anything that's concealable. So a sword cane is legit in Florida because the sword's inside the cane. So
Love it.
when you see somebody like Congressman Green with that kind of a cane, you could be pulling out like a very sharp object. And there are companies that make them.
You know, Claymore's got that curve to it. I can conceal that. Does that count?
Yes. If you can face towards enemy, but the backblast is still gonna
Yeah,
be a
oh, it's gonna,
problem.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
gonna sting.
But I mean, if we're out doing one another for concealed carry, then
If you're,
yeah.
yeah, I think that gets more into the realm of the suicide vest.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean use it while I'm still wearing it, right? Just
Oh,
carry part.
okay, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, I see.
I'll get back in the clack clack. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Cool.
yeah, we're in Florida. He's in Georgia, and the I think that something unique about or really interesting about the speech last night was the clear division. We just have a tiny majority in Congress, so it's almost split straight down the middle aisle. And you have one side that was standing and cheering, and the other side that was like sitting on their hands or holding up little protest signs, which are great because they were like instant memes today. Like I saw one of what's her name, Ilhan Omar. Who's the one from Minnesota that wears the?
Caitlin Omar. Yeah.
Somebody was holding a sign behind her, and it read, "I married my brother."
Yeah.
So the Democrats really don't understand memeology or second order effects. They just set themselves up for that.
Well,
But they're flailing. They don't know what to do. They
they
don't
still
really have a.
think they still think that the martial capabilities and the sub-martial law enforcement destructive capabilities of the state are still on their side and that they still have control of it. And all they need to do is be the face of the resistance, the insurgency, and the insurgency will succeed behind and beneath the scenes. And you can see it in what is it, Robert Gouveia, the attorney that does the podcast, where he's reading out SCOTUS actions and lower court actions, etc. And
Robert Barnes. Robert Barnes, yeah.
no, this is Gouveia, I think's his name. He's hilarious. absolutely hilarious and brilliant the way he's able to do it. But if you look at his channel, you see that there's a vast amount of resistance happening in the judiciary at every level, pushing back lawsuits, 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 and the DOJ, and they are Trump's DOJ under Bondi are pushing back and pushing back and pushing back rapidly. Like this is like within hours, you'll get a 25-page rebuttal, right? Formal structured rebuttal. So
Yeah, this is yeah, we're definitely we're definitely shaping the battlefield.
yes,
And
the
and
lines are being drawn.
and right
Yeah.
now it's still in the lawfare realm, but it's a lot better having Pam, even though I'm not like a huge Pam Bondi she definitely beats Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray. And when Bongino gets to the FBI, that's going to be very important because the deputy director is sort of like the executive officer or the vice president. We can see how Vance has been like turned into the pit bull. You know, Trump can sit on the couch and maintain decorum while Vance throws some punches.
Well, he did
Uh,
last night. There were several times he looked straight at the Dems and pointed at them and nodded. There was several times.
yeah, and with Zelensky, of
Yeah,
course, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but when Bongino is in the office next to Kash Patel, they're going to reinforce each other's backbone.
Yeah.
If the deputy director was somebody weak, like another Pam Bondi type, it would be hard for Kash Patel to have the steel in the spine. But with Bongino in the adjoining office, he's going to have all the steel in his spine that he needs. And the two of them together, people may or may not realize when the Russiagate hoax was in full flower before the 2016 election and all through Trump's first term, the narrative was almost 100% airtight. Trump's a Russian agent or asset. And one of the only people that was pushing back, and I give her a lot of credit, was Maria Bartiromo on the Sunday morning shows, especially. She would have on Devin Nunes, who was saying that the Steele dossier is bogus and the FISA courts are being abused, and that was very important to have some area of counter narrative. If the sky is entirely overcast for a long time, you can almost forget that there's blue up there, or stars at night. So just even having a patch of blue sky gives people something to focus on besides just the gray, foggy gloom. And that was Devin Nunes. But who was giving Devin Nunes the things to read on television? It was Kash Patel. So, and he has a very unique career path that has gotten him from a public defender. I mean, he's not your typical Ivy League, deep state, deep plant, deep selection. So having him as FBI director with Dan Bongino next door, they're going to be able to fight very hard. But we've seen with this decision today about the USAID funding that this is they're like tectonic plates that are moving. And you can say, well, today the conservatives or the Trump, the MAGA movement had a defeat today. But what it really is showing is that the pressure of these tectonic plates moving against each other is continuing to build. It's not just going to be a small release of energy and MAGA wins. The other side is pushing back very hard using the judiciary, even though it's just the small benches that are doing this, making universal nationwide decisions that really take the power away from the president. And we've seen that the SCOTUS is not some, high, the judges on Mount Olympus. They're also venal humans. They've got their own issues. Amy Barrett is pro-life, and that got her through the hearings because conservatives believed she would be conservative about everything. But she's basically a bleeding heart liberal. She's all about relief for Haiti and pouring money into every humanitarian do-gooder cause. So to her, these USAID funds, she doesn't see them as CIA operations. She sees them as we're trying to, help babies in Africa. So this is the problem with, and you were mentioning this in your podcast, women in power.
Yeah.
There's a reason that they weren't given the vote. There's a reason they
Weaponized
didn't vote.
empathy. Yeah, weaponized empathy.
Right.
Um, I have a slightly, while I don't necessarily disagree with any of that, I have a slightly different take that we saw very much heavy preponderance of in 2020, in from November into December, or excuse me, into January. Um, no one in a position of constitutional authority or in a role that derives real power from the Constitution wants to be the one that makes the ruling or the decision that takes the country to bloodshed and a civil war. And unfortunately, because they're not, they don't want that on their record. They don't want to be the one that's, and it's normally a group of individuals, right, in different roles, et cetera. But nobody wants to be the one, except for the ones who want to, and they're rarely in those positions, but nobody wants to be the one who did the ruling that could, 2 steps down the road, be bloodshed in the streets. And so even though what they're doing is unconstitutional, like the SCOTUS ruling today, because what they did is they defended the abuse of the executive power by lower courts. So for all intents and purposes, giving the judiciary the executive branch's power. So nobody wants to be the ones that go to war, take us to war. Unfortunately, what that does is, and I put a meme up that I created that's both the British and the American flags, is, where are civil wars found? They're found on the path we take to not go to civil war. We make it inevitable.
I think it would have been better today if they had ruled the other way,
Yes.
because I think that this is locking down more pressure for a bigger
Well,
explosion.
and it
Because
invalidates.
Trump is going to have to do something like just say, screw you. How many divisions does the Pope have? Andrew
Yeah.
Jackson.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
Can
And
I
unfortunately, the people making these rulings and these decisions know that, but they're looking at history or survival in their own community. Like, well, I ruled the other way. Yes, this forced a situation where it had to happen, but I'm on your side. I'm one of the good guys. I didn't rule, even though my ruling or my decision was completely against my oath or completely against the Constitution.
And they should have a little bit more guts because under the last administration, they had Antifa BLM people beating drums outside their house. They had assassination
Yeah.
attempts.
So I've
That's
said
not
this.
going to happen now. So they should have a little bit more courage, but
I've
apparently
said
they
this
don't.
numerous times. The greatest force in human history has always been and probably always will be cowardice.
And
That,
blackmail is easy in this
yeah,
era.
yeah,
You can find people's weak points. This is something that all operational intelligence agencies do. They do a target study.
yeah,
And they find out, this guy, he would do anything for his grandchildren. So you just send some pictures of his grandchildren on the swing saying,
yeah,
be a real shame if she, fell
yeah,
in front of a bus.
yeah, yeah.
do you,
And they're
Or you make sure
susceptible
the
to that.
grandchild that is sick gets the right doctor. You make sure the one, right? It's not always um, the threat side of things. Some people are in fact, most people are far more easily swayed by gifts and
Yeah, and
benevolence.
it's become a meme in the last couple of weeks how many politicians, and we're mostly focused on the Democrats, but I'm sure if we analyze the Republicans, it won't be far off. How many of them are making 30 times their salary? Is it like Nancy Pelosi, brilliant stock picks, have nothing to do with advanced knowledge of bills that will crush one industry or boost another. But even more common, a lot of the USAID money 98% of it never leaves the Washington Beltway.
Correct.
It's going to
Correct.
officers who are making, $600,000 a year to be on the committee to help the orphans of Sadville,
Yeah.
as Elon Musk put it. That the big scam is just set up a philanthropic organization that sounds nice, like help the orphans of Sadville, but then no money goes there. You just
Yeah.
keep it.
Yeah.
And that's been going on for decades.
And that happens down not just at the federal level, but state and county and municipal levels as well.
Right. And also steering contracts and so forth. But the rock is being overturned by Doge, and that this is like an existential threat to a lot of Congress that can't explain they're living way beyond their means of support. And if you count their brothers, sisters, and cousins who all are, happen to be on these NGOs to help the orphans of Sadville, and they're all making $500,000 a year. And a lot of them are able to come straight out of college right into a virtual deep state organization. People like Chelsea Clinton are like the poster girls for this, where you come out of college and you're making $500,000 a year for do nothing jobs. But there are a lot of the children and nieces and nephews of the deep state. They give each other favors. They invite their kids to be interns, at law firms, et cetera. And it's just a revolving door towards success. And a lot of the time, it's all based on the NGO money.
In the ancient times, we did, what'd you do? You send your second and third sons into the priesthood, the grift, or into officer in the military, another form of grift. Same thing now. We just don't send them to the priesthood anymore, and we don't send them to the military anymore. They go into the NGOs.
At least a military officer might actually do something,
Might.
and a priest might actually do something. But
Might.
if your official job, you're like on the board commission to help the orphans of Sadville, and you're making $600,000 a year, and no money is getting to any orphans. This is something where the Doge whiz kids were able to plug into these antique computer systems that people thought were opaque by their being so obsolete. I mean, running on COBOL, things like that. They thought nobody will ever be able to figure this out. And some of what they've uncovered, I think, was specifically designed as warnings, like these NSA chat rooms about the the transgender LGBTQI stuff. It's not just that it's bad that NSA people are perverts and freaks. It's a warning to everybody else in the federal government. Oh, you thought those private chats were really self-expiring because you set them to disappear after 24 hours? So a lot of people are getting a warning that obviously these chats that we thought were going to disappear didn't disappear. So when these people are called into congressional hearings, some of the ones that were given pardons by Biden, they've lost their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, but they are still susceptible to perjury charges for anything they say going forward.
And that millennium can still be charged at the state level because a presidential pardon doesn't cover that.
But when specifically when they're in front of Congress, a lot of the other witnesses that have not received any kind of immunity are now thinking, when I'm asked a question by, let's just say, for example, Matt Gaetz is in the special counsel. I think that he might turn up in something like that because he's a really brilliant, aggressive cross-examiner. When they ask you the question, did you or did you not say such and such a thing? All these people are going to be thinking, actually, I did. I just thought that chat was going to disappear. And it'll be like Chris Hansen with To Catch a Predator. No, I never talked to her. I thought she was an adult. But right here, you said you've got all the chats.
Right.
Right. And it's like, so these people, when they're in front of the congressional committee, are going to be in a tough spot because you can go to prison for perjury, especially now that it's Pam Bondi. And, And I'm not saying that we're going to win. I'm just saying more of these battle lines. We're like prepping a battlefield. People are moving up their electronic warfare, moving up their artillery, figuring out new systems. But these are battle lines that are being drawn. And we
People are
saw one
either,
result today with the Supreme Court, but we're going to be seeing, it's not one-sided. It's a battle that's forming up.
I don't disagree. People are deciding whether to cross the battle lines, capitulate and cross the battle lines, or to dig in and prepare for the war.
And at another level, I think we're going to start seeing challenges of federal control, period, especially if the SCOTUS is going to uh, side with the
The lower
judiciary,
courts.
and not only the Supreme Court, but I mean, now there's like something like 25 of these rulings, and only 2 of them have been overturned. So it looks like the rest are going to stand, basically emasculating the president.
So I
So
wrote, well, it's not just emasculating the president, it's the judiciary taking upon themselves executive powers, which is expressly forbidden under what, Article 2 or Article 3? So
what we could see governors in states like Florida taking on a much more aggressive stance.
really have to, states' rights have to return. So I hate to say it this way, and I'm no scholar on these things, but much of what was fought out in the Civil War and powers given to the federal government, a lot of what Lincoln and post-Lincoln was put in place and really culminated with uh, Roosevelt with FDR is going to have to be reversed. That power that's accumulated to the center has to decentralize again and go back to the states. The problem is that there's too many states right now who survive off of the federal tit.
Imagine if there were states that had the same attitude about the 10th Amendment as the First and Second. Wait a minute, I'm sorry, I don't see a Department of Education here telling Tallahassee how we have to run schools.
Yeah.
Whether or not they abolish the Department of Education, a governor could just say, I'm sorry, I don't see that.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
this is exclusively reserved for the states. It's not explicitly defined in the Constitution,
Delineated. Yeah.
and so it may come to a states' rights battle based on governors being very aggressive about the 10th Amendment.
Yeah.
I don't see an FBI. The FBI was created by Congress, just like these lower courts. So
CIA,
all of these,
NSA,
the
ATF. Yeah.
what is mentioned in the Constitution is not the NSA, FBI, DOJ, but what is mentioned in the Constitution is the militia.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the
States
militia has
militia, not federal
more of a
militia.
reason to exist than any of those. They were created by Congress, but then, like Frankenstein's monster, they grow up and become the master because they're the accumulator of blackmail material.
Yeah.
So what congressmen, I mean,
And the
besides
willingness
the
to
congressmen,
violence.
besides the Congress people that have been grifting on these grants, setting up their families for these $500,000 a year do-nothing jobs, imagine how many of them actually have blackmail material because they've gone all the way back to high school and found your drunk driving manslaughter conviction that was what's the term when they blanket conviction. This happened with Obama twice running for state senate and senator. His opponents at the last minute, like the opponents' divorce records came out like a week before their elections. So you can see how important these kind of records that the deep state holds on people. And this is why we're not going to see the Epstein files. The Epstein files are going to be hidden forever.
I asked EM this last week, and I don't know if I asked you this too, Matt, but do you even care about it anymore?
As a bellwether of who's in charge of the country, it's important. I mean, they're still hiding stuff about Oswald and the CIA from 1963.
But how are you going to trust it? I mean, they've had it for so long, it's been scrubbed. So even anything they put out there, You're gonna take it with a grain of salt. What are they gonna put Tom Hanks's name on there just to appease
No,
the mainstream?
you're actually you're 100% right. You wouldn't, even if they gave 80%, but they scrubbed out the 20% that was all Mossad, CIA, FBI connections. You won't know. So they made it's the Watergate term limited hangout comes to mind, where they know they've got to give something. They got to throw the dog a bone, but they're not going to throw him the big best bone, just something to gnaw on.
There's
But
always disposables, and you dispose of the disposables. You
and
don't
the
go after your core assets. You never give up a core asset.
But who knows if things are copied? Another thing today that's different from previous times is with digitization, a lot of records could be leaked because it may not have been that closely held. But a lot of what was in the Epstein, I mean, trunks full of DVDs and, just trunkfuls. So this blackmail material is very useful for every regime. We took the Gestapo blackmail files and just made them the CIA blackmail files. You don't throw away a tool like that.
Yeah.
But if it shows that like the Mossad is actually directing our intelligence, it's hard to understand how it can't be when Israel has a higher per capita GDP than the United States. Why aren't they sending us money, right? I mean, but apparently that's the power structure. So we're not going to know what's in any of the Diddy files or the Epstein files. But it helps people understand we have the overt above the waterline people running the Department of Justice today, and apparently the head of the New York the Southern District New York FBI field office was fired, forced to resign.
Mm-hmm.
His name Dunninger, something like that.
What was the gap from last week then, with the whole thing with Bondi putting those binders out?
I think it's a setup.
By who?
I think there's a whole lot of drawing out your enemy.
And
Because the obvious enemies are the obvious enemies. I don't think
she's as smart or dedicated.
Yeah, well, I think there's two things there. I think one, naivety, where she thought, well, she's now in the top seat, so they're just going to obey her. And that doesn't happen. It doesn't even happen on an infantry squad, right? With the new sergeant or E4 doing the buck sergeant's job. So I think one was some naivety there. But the other is there's a bit of drawing people out where, back to the statement you made earlier, Matt, the lines are being drawn. Who's who in the zoo? We're going to have to fight this out. They know it. We know it. There's no way time in history where something's got this point. It hasn't been a fight. Not once. Not in any civilization or society. So, okay, well, let's figure out who's who. Let's see if we can keep it from going to a fight. But let's know that that's, they already tried to kill the leading candidate more than once. And what happens,
came literally with a whisker.
And who did they use? Well, they used the same guys the CIA was using in 1945 through 1990s, the Ukrainians. Same people.
Yeah.
What's going to happen when the war in Ukraine's over? That's going to metastasize, and they're going to go right back to what, the Banderites, which we now call the Azovs, are going to go right back to what they used to do for the very same people.
If they perceive that they lost and were sold out and backstabbed,
they're going to do it anyways because it's their nature.
A huge percentage of the weapons that were sent to Ukraine were diverted. So they're everywhere. So
yes,
the idea of my idea is the 20-foot cargo container holding 2,000 AK-47s. That's an instant Rwanda anywhere that box is opened.
Yeah.
But now you've got javelins that can be used to take down a police station or a SWAT truck. And you were talking about the coming cartel war, which I think is already happening. We've got predators overhead. We're using our assets to extradite these 28 capos that were in prison, but they were in prison like in Goodfellas, with they've still got their cell phones and they're technically quote unquote in prison, but Now they're going to be in a supermax. So it's a new level of reality for them.
Have you
But they
seen
have
all
it.
of the reputation washing that's happening via social media, YouTube primarily, where the old capos, the old Italian capos, the old Hells Angels capos, the old cartel guys, all these channels, this glorifying and, you know,
Like
it's
motorcycle gangs, that
reputation.
kind of
Yeah, it's
stuff.
reputation washing straight up.
Or how
We're
about
not the
Jelani?
bad
How about
guys.
Jelani in Syria? I mean, he's a classic. He went from Al Qaeda and ISIS to wearing like a green Fidel uniform during the motorbike invasion phase. Now he's in a suit and he's meeting, Ursula von der Leyen. The guy is a head chopper.
So they know a fight's coming and they know we're coming after them.
Yeah,
And
this.
what do? I'm not a bad guy. Well, I was a bad guy before. I'm not a bad guy now. And then there's this other guy that came up on a show here recently. I can't remember. He wasn't cartel, but he worked directly with the Sinaloa. Um, and he said on the show that he did, which was a very fascinating show, and he gave up some stuff and talked some things and structure and operations. And all of it was true.
Is that Ed Calderon? Yeah.
Maybe I don't remember. Um, I don't generally keep an eye on these things. I knew the Hells Angels when I was young, out of Oakland, Sonny's people, 1970s, early mid 1970s. Um, this guy he said on the show, "You're not going to beat the cartels. The cartels are going to unleash hell on you. They're going to assassinate your kids. They're going to blow up dams. They're going to do all this." And his solution was let the criminals, the cartel leaders, do prison time down in South and Central America, Gucci prisons, and they'll back off. It's like, are you kidding me? This is a mouthpiece for the enemy telling us if you don't let us, if you don't let us just back off business and you push this, we're going to unleash slaughter and this, what they're doing in South and Central America right here in the United States, and you can't stop us. You're not going to defeat us. He said it on a very famous podcast.
Yeah,
All nice and cool and
and we're
relaxed
going to
and
see and we're going to see new weapons. So it's not going to be like Charles Bronson in The Mechanic, with a guy with a rifle,
yeah,
you know, from a
yeah,
parked van. It's going
yeah,
to be
drones
it's going to be
and
drones dropping a grenade on, a
yeah,
judge's house or
yeah,
a judge by the swimming pool.
yeah,
And sometimes it gets his kids. So
yeah,
this is what we're in for. Yeah. So this show is going to run Thursday and Friday. So I finally remembered this time to do a Kindle free run. You can put these books on Kindle
awesome,
for free for
awesome.
Thursday and Friday. But yeah, this Aslan concept doesn't mean it returns to Mexico. It means it becomes
Ungoverned,
ungovernable
ungoverned.
cartel land. And
Correct.
they've already, you know, since the really since the 60s and 70s, these groups, people have heard of La Raza, but they haven't heard of groups like Mecha, which in Spanish means match and fuse. And the initials stand for in Spanish, stand for the Student Movement for Aztlan,
Yeah, yeah,
Mecha. And their symbol is a like Aztec warbird, and it's holding a head chopper in one talon, and it's holding a lit stick of dynamite in the other talon. And this is an overt group with chapters in high schools and colleges all across the Southwest.
yeah.
So they've been laying this ground for decades and decades.
Yes.
So now you have mayors, judges, district attorneys that have this
Prosecutors,
that, that com-
sheriffs, police
they
chiefs.
completely have this mindset.
Yeah,
And it's not that they're just ideologically bent on like returning Arizona to Mexico, but they're not loyal to Washington.
no,
Washington isn't even in the top, list of
no,
their loyalties,
no.
and they're very susceptible to corruption. The plomo o plata formula works equally on both sides of the border. And if threats don't work, people are easily suborned,
Yes.
including local police that are,
Yeah.
used by federal agencies as assets, suborned local police that are, caught in acts of corruption. Instead of being arrested, they're just turned into deniable assets of the federal law enforcement. So, that
The mob state, as I say.
then there are
We have
some,
got to get rid of the mob state that was
and
put in place in 1941 through 1947, institutionalized in 1947, with the interface of the mafia, the CIA, and Wall Street, the banks. Right?
well,
How much, with 600 billion to $1 trillion a year in baseline cash flow with very high margins, right? Like human trafficking has some of the highest margins of any product in the world.
right, it's
Uh,
it's reusable. You
it's
recycle it for
right. So with 600 billion to $1 trillion in baseline cash, the cost right now is somewhere around 4.5% of that to be washed. That's what the banks are charging. And then once that's washed, it goes into bank accounts, regional, local and regional bank accounts, and then that percolates up to the big ones. So you're getting 600 billion to $1 trillion in baseline cash that flows into the banking system. That is the liquidity that keeps the banking system going and
it
has been
also
keeping it
flows
going for 30 years.
downward. It flows downward to becoming clinics and sports fields in Mexico,
Oh, well, no, no, no. Yeah,
buying loyalty at
yes,
the
correct.
soldier recruit
But
level.
that's not the cash flowing back out. That's a misnomer. That's lending that happens from the banks. So,
Right, but it's the
right,
same fungible
it's the
money
same.
pot.
So you've got 600 billion to $1 trillion a year coming in as baseline cash into the financial and banking system that then gets lent out at 7 to 10 to 1. So you have this complete skewing, and this is what they figured out in prohibition. With prohibition, all this goes back to prohibition all the way up into the 1930s when they repealed it, is the financial system, the banking system, the political systems, the government systems, all the systems realized we don't have to have a functional economy. We just have to have enough of a functional economy so that there's enough money being spent by people on vice that we can flow that cash back into our systems. We can outsource manufacturing. We can get rid of all these other things that are baseline fundamental economy. We can single box stuff and push all these people out of the ability to earn a living. We just need them to have enough of an income to support vice. And that will plus up our financial system, our banks, et cetera, in unaccountable ways that are almost completely separate from an actual economy, actual functioning economy. And it skews everything. And it's been going on now for over 100 years. Now it's in everything, everywhere.
But it doesn't build ships, and
It doesn't
China's
build
outbuilding us
anything.
100 to 1. I mean,
Yeah, it
we're
doesn't build anything. What you need is the financialization of everything so that you can, wash, utilize, hypothecate that money, it's, that cash, et cetera. And you need just enough of that trickle down to, have enough of that cash flow coming in. It's a tax. It's a tax system, an unaccountable tax system. And then what do? Well, you have all these sophisticated ways in which you bribe everybody in the governments and in any role in government and academia and all think tanks and all these other things to just keep it going and to support it and defend it.
how far can it go, and what's its end point?
It's an infection. So that's the right question. It's a parasitic infection, and at some point the host dies. And so what it
In
does
terms of
historically, it looks to jump host to another host. Well, the host it tried to jump to was China, and China said, "Fuck you." And China put up the China firewall. China started going hard after corruption. So what do? Xi's a bad guy. Xi's a dictator. Xi's a, this or that. The Chinese are this or that. They're a totalitarian state, et cetera. It's like, no, what the Chinese decided after we'd raped them for about $70 trillion over the last 40 years is you're not going to jump host to China. We're
and
not going to let that.
Russia did sort of the same thing.
And Russia did the same. That's exactly why we're going after Russia. So the thing about Russia and China, and this gets to why I'm saying the English civilization and why we need to get it back. The thing that saved Russia and China, the Russians and the Chinese, is they are civilizational people. Russians are a Russian civilization. It's over 1,000 years old. And they went through their collapse and decline, and they never want to do that again. Every family remembers that, and not as some distant memory. Well, China has the same with Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, and all of that shit. They don't ever want to do that again, ever. And there is very few families in China that don't have a direct memory of it. Anybody who's 30 years of old or older and they still have the stories from their grandparents, et cetera, or their parents, right? So they don't want to ever go. They do not want this to metastasize or to jump host. So what happens? Well, with a pathogen, a virulent pathogen, and usually it's a family of pathogens that are kind of working together, right? A collective of viruses. They kill the host. They literally
So,
kill the host.
but then what happens to the host, meaning the people, the society?
They're all gone. They're done. It just everything collapses. Everything collapses and decays, and you wind up with a failed narco state. You wind up with Mexico.
Yeah, the Russians, and I think they can be proud of it. They went through the collapse of the Soviet Union, but did not have a social collapse. I mean, there were
Correct.
years in the 1990s
Hard years.
when military officers were told, just keep putting the uniform on and coming to work, even though there's no salary.
Yeah.
And if we ever get this ship working again, we're going to
We'll make
consider
you
you for a
whole,
pension.
and we'll make you whole. Yeah.
But so people were going to work with no function, no real
Yeah.
salary that paid
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
and they used it because of their limited communication infrastructure. They mainly had a landline telephone system where what was really important was your own little Rolodex of contacts. They used that archaic system to continue to make sure coal deliveries were made. Otherwise, entire towns freeze to death.
Correct.
And
Correct.
they did this without a functioning central government directing
There's
it.
because
They
they
were
are a
using
civilizational people and they could
and
rely on the loyalties and the trust and the connectivity of the civilization. And they didn't allow, we tried to terrorist war them with through the Chechens and others. We're still trying to do it.
and
Um,
chop them up with the oligarchs that we were
and chop them
installing.
over the oligarchs and bribe all the oligarchs. And
But they came through that, and in many ways
because
they're much
they're
stronger
Russians,
today.
correct, absolutely, because they're Russians and Russians are 140. So Chinese are doing the same. Now, what China's been doing over the last 20 some odd years is steadily cutting the Americans and the Europeans out. You're
I
not going
just
to
saw
do
I
that
just
to
saw one of
us.
these moving. I saw a moving graph today, graph in motion of Chinese automobile output, and it's staggering the last 10 years. The rest of the world is going to be driving Chinese cars, and
Yes,
nobody,
yes,
Ford and GM will just be footnotes in
yeah.
history like Studebaker,
Yes. And we
the way it's
can't color
going.
revolution them. We can't do them. We're not going to be, it doesn't work. Well, in order for us to survive, for the host that is the English speaking people, we have to remember that we too are a civilizational people. And one of the extraordinary civilizations that, like the Russians, is over 1,000 years old and has had some extraordinary contributions to the world. And not just like the Russians, where they've done some extraordinary geopolitical things through history. Like there would be no United States if it wasn't for Catherine the Great and Alexander II. There wouldn't. We would have lost the Civil War, the colonial conflict, become a civil war, become a revolution, and we would have lost the War of 1812. Well, what did the English speaking peoples do? We brought roads and schools and just legal systems to the world. We also ended slavery on the seas
But what is
at immense cost over
but that's
200
that
years.
but that civilization now in the UK, you're approaching 10% Muslim, and that's like a
We
fatal
have,
level of pathogen
yeah, no,
because
so
the
you're
your
absolutely
your
right.
social your leftist politicians, I mean, they just
Well, they're continental owned. They're literally owned by the continent. Those politicians, so many
but
of the
there's
bureaucrats.
no coming back from an Islamic takeover at the point where
Well,
UK is. I mean, they
I
may be the
disagree with the
first.
UK. I disagree with the UK, and now I'm holding my breath a little bit. But the United Kingdom is the homeland and the heartland, just like Moscow and Kiev are the heartland and the homeland of the Russian peoples. As much as we have a quibble with them, you can you have to get as a kid and a grandkid, you have to get your own house in order. But then you don't let your parents fail. because then why'd you get your own house in order? Who the hell are you?
But
What the
what
hell
can
are
we?
you?
I think that I
We
think
have
the
to
UK is toast. I think the UK is
I
beyond.
think there's going to, possibly, quite possibly. But the thing that the United Kingdom has is that, I've said this, I've posted this several times. If William went out on the balcony and rallied the banners, there would be millions of men come to fight in the United Kingdom for him from all across the Commonwealth, because that's
I
still
think
who we really are.
I think it's gone, and
I don't think
I
so,
use
because
it.
I hear it from a lot of men, a lot of men.
I use an analogy to a famous series of science experiments held in Russia from the 50s through the 80s with the fox farm experiments. So in foxes, you can have 3 generations in a decade, so things move a little more quickly. But they were trying to modify these wild foxes in these giant, like a chicken farm, roofed cages under big
Mhm.
roofs, thousands of foxes being harvested for their fur to make fur coats. And the idea was we're going to select for docility. So out of each litter, you put your hand in the cage, and the only the foxes that cower away are bred, and the
Yeah,
foxes that
I'm familiar. Yeah,
well,
I'm familiar.
this the wild foxes in just a couple generations. It doesn't take millions of years for Darwin with random mutations when you're selecting for this. They turn from wild foxes to little chubby Pomeranians with a curly tail that would bark and a flat nose and hop on your lap. They also ran the experiment the other way. And then a few generations, you can select for aggression and they'll be back to wild foxes. The DNA is still in there. But what's happened in Europe is since World War II, they've selected for the docility. They've essentially, through war, eliminated their most ferocious foxes. The SS Viking blood is pretty much gone. They were exterminated on the Russian front to a great extent. The same thing happened to the British, especially in World War One. The flower of English manhood, there's rhymes about that, I forget, but essentially the best of Britain was
Yeah,
just
no, I
wiped out
understand.
in trench
Yeah.
warfare. And through social engineering, women don't need a father because welfare is going to pay for their children. So you don't need to marry an aggressive go-getter husband. Any cuck sperm donor is good enough. If you're
So,
pregnant, the kid will be raised by the state. So they've
so
duplicated the Fox experiment, and the English and European stock are not, Fritz from the Russian front waiting to reemerge.
no,
They
I
might
disagree with you. I
they might if
disagree
they
with you.
had a few they might if they had 40 years, but
I disagree with you.
well, let me just finish this point. History is full of Islamic conquests of stronger, better, superior cultures that just couldn't withstand, the meat cleaver attack coming through. The Berbers in Morocco were taller, smarter, fitter than these skinny, scrawny desert Arabs that invaded Morocco. But the skinny, scrawny Arabs had a binding ideology and
It's
fanaticism.
exactly, now you just said it. You just literally touched on the very thing
But
I'm saying.
they took over
Hang on a
Morocco and
second.
all the Berber tribes one
You
after the
just
other.
stated it. You just stated it. You have to have a unifying martial purpose. You have to have, again, the way in which you defeat a stronger enemy is deny them access to, if they are civilizational people, deny them access to the recognition that they're a civilizational people. Because a civilizational people have been through all these types of fights before, numerous times, from internal and external threats. And they have, and this is not exaggeration. I hear people from all over, particularly the Five Eyes, but also some colonials, from that are not of ethnic British Isles stock, who would come and rally to the United Kingdom to fight, just as they would here in the United States. What holds them up is all of this our own leaders, too many of them are cowards now. Too many of them have bought off on this, don't allow our own people to connect with their civilization because they might come for us because we're doing shit that's not good for them or right for them. But reconnecting with English civilization, which is heavy preponderance of Scandinavian, Viking, Northwest German, Scandinavians as well, or Vikings as well. Well, Vikings a verb, not a noun. It's still in there. The guys are still there, and it doesn't take much.
But it's in those little curly-tailed Pomeranian foxes. It's in there, but it takes
I'm sorry, but we had the
generations.
troubles in the United Kingdom just 30 years ago. Those people are still around.
What are they're doing nothing. They're rolling over like the little Pomeranian lapdog. You know, the
Leadership. And
in revolutions, and you know, we can define civil war versus revolution, et cetera, but we don't need to spend all the time. Just in the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, if the revolution conquers the capital and the key cities and is ruthless in controlling the food, making executions, they can pick off the outlying regions one at a time. There's the outlying region, the Vendée region in France during the French Revolution.
Yep.
They, you know, very strong Christian people wiped out, exterminated. So in the UK right now, they don't call it Londonistan for no reason. The mayor of London is a Muslim, and his government every day, the British have a couple of coast guards, but the main one is called the RNLI. It's like the Royal Naval Lifeboat Institute. I forget what it's, but RNLI is what's on the side of their coast guard boats. Every day they're picking up hundreds of men in giant rubber rafts. These are not the rafts you can buy at a West Marine. You know, these are purpose-built in China to hold 100 men in calm conditions to go 10 miles out to sea, to be picked up by a British boat. They were doing the same thing in the Mediterranean, taking them to Italy. So it's a ferry service. The British government is running a ferry service. The way we were flying.
I'm quite aware of that. I'm quite aware of that. Here's what I think
but you can't, you're not going to, Tommy Robinson, who would be a patriot, could be a leader, is in solitary confinement. And if he's not in solitary confinement, he'll be killed by the Muslims that run his prison.
So
I mean, I don't see a way back from this.
It falls. The United Kingdom falls. The United States goes through its conflict, and we might or might not fall. That's not a foregone conclusion yet. And we go through our fight, and then we go home.
Well, the problem,
and that might take 20 years.
But I see as a civilization, I don't know much about China, but the Russians have as a national characteristic is toughness.
Well, we have it too. In our English civilization, we do too, and that's the problem, man.
But
we are not allowed to reconnect. We're not allowed to even know or talk about or discuss English civilization. Who the hell keeps us from that primarily? The fucking Europeans who what? They've been living parasitically off of the English-speaking peoples for at least 200 years, and increasingly going back to 1688. And what have they done? They've been denying us our access, our young men and our young women, access to the knowledge and understanding that the English are a distinct people. And I don't mean an ethnic group, because there's nobody distinctly English, but the English civilization, which is a collection of peoples, that we are a civilization. We've been through these things. And Marshall,
I see a lot of other factors in this equation.
Well, it's the same here in the bloody United States then. Are you saying that we're fallen too? And that we're going to fall? Because we've been weakened Pomeranians? Because if the United Kingdom falls and stays fallen, the United States will follow not too far after by the very same forces. So if we can't stand to and figure ourselves out as a civilization and reconnect with that, which has been a whole lot of fights and a whole lot of war and a whole lot of bloodiness, and we've staved off every other attempt.
Yeah,
if we can't reconnect with that, the United States will fall too.
In your podcast the other day, you were speaking about the cartels, this coming war as being the most direct threat immediately over the horizon. They've already got forces in place.
As you said, it's already started.
They have an inexhaustible supply of soldiers. You're not going to
Yep.
You can't take them out at the leadership end
No.
and you just create
No.
a hydra,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
can't take them out at the soldier end. There's an inexhaustible supply of soldiers because their baseline is not, I want to go to college and defer gratitude and have a family. Their attitude is, I'm going to be dead by 30 anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's an inexhaustible supply of
Yeah.
sicarios. And what you were saying was we're going to have to like deputize thousands of GWAT veterans. I don't see that ever happening in this country.
Then we're
Maybe
lost.
death squads.
Then we're lost. Then
it
the
could-
United States is already lost.
But it could
Very much by your logic.
But if it happens, it's going to be at the state level. Washington, D.C. is never
Totally agree
going
with
to-
that. No. I totally agree with that. That's what I'm saying. Sheriffs, government, in that conversation, the only way this gets solved is at the local level. States' rights, states, governors, mayors, sheriff, the local system, judiciary system, the law enforcement
with a
system, the
vast
governance
with a
system.
vast deputizing system,
Yes.
passing out
Yes.
the silver. The Texas Rangers in the 19th century
Correct.
were
Yes.
very badly paid.
Yes.
You can say
But they were
not in it-
weapons free.
They were not in it for the money.
Same with Arizona. Arizona
Nobody
had
got
Rangers.
rich being a Texas Ranger.
Here's
They
a
were-
qu-
They
okay.
were motivated by other factors.
Here's a question I have with that. Then I do want to go back to Europe, and I want to go to Russia, Ukraine at some point in this conversation as well. But in terms of domestically, on the state and local level, this is just through my lens. As I drive around here, I don't see people ready to fight. I don't see I just don't see the physical capability that is needed.
Oh, that can come quick. That can come quick. Hardship and people will turn ruthless and violent. And if you can organize that in some way, you've got a force. That can turn quick. Real quick.
This is all not assuming, but understood or seen through a context of there's still a functioning economy, there's still food supply
Yes.
chains.
There's still status hierarchies.
So
There's still
the
leadership structures.
During the Troubles in Northern Ireland, which was a low intensity civil war, religious civil war, only in Northern Ireland, Ulster, there were still factories open, buses still ran, occasionally a pub got bombed, but people still went to work.
Yeah.
And there was still water flowing and the electrical grid was never attacked. This video and essays by I think his name is David Betz, Betz. I posted the links yesterday. He's an American who's lived in Britain
I've
for the
seen
last 30 years.
Yeah.
But he's just saying in the context of the UK, but it could just as easily be the United States. This type of civil war is going to be urban versus rural. I call the big cities the blue hives. They're the Democrat vote harvesting plantations. Their crop is votes, paid for with welfare. But a lot of the productive part of the country is not in these blue hives, and eventually, the fault line's not going to be north versus south. It's going to be urban versus rural, and in that context, the people out in the hinterland are going to start saying, just cut off the cities because it's so easy to do. Natural gas.
And then
power
isolate
grid.
them in there to deal with themselves until they kill themselves off.
Right,
or
because
starve
we
out.
don't.
Yes.
When the Russians had the Soviet Union fall apart, they still had their cities. You will literally freeze to death if you can't maintain the infrastructure. Everybody in the
Gas.
city will look like Jack Nicholson in The Shining.
Yeah.
By January. There's no kidding about that. So living in that type of an environment, and similarly Japanese, all the northern peoples, they've had to figure out how do we get through winter is like a baseline. It doesn't
I had
happen
this
in
conversation.
it doesn't happen in the tropics. You can just go wear flip-flops and pick a banana, right?
Yeah.
Work tomorrow, work another time. In the cold places, you have to figure out how to cooperate, or this entire town freezes to death and starves to
Yeah.
death.
We had this conversation last time with Mike.
Yeah, and
You have to plan ahead. You have to think ahead, and you've got to get it right.
And there's no guarantees. Jamestown has starvation winters down to the point of cannibalism, and these were Christians with everything in terms of preparing to create a colony in a rich country where there's game and fish, and it's not the Arctic tundra. And they still had starvation winters. It's very hard for humans to get through a winter. If you just take a group of humans and drop them out into the plain, they're probably going to starve to death before they ever figure out how to farm.
I spent 8 years of my life above 7,500 feet on the Canadian border. I'm quite well aware of winter.
Yeah. So
Quite well.
All I have is a Cleveland winter. I don't think that's the same for
No, I remember 30 below zero for 4 or 5 weeks at a time, 12 feet of snow on the ground at a time. One of the most prevalent to this day thoughts or memories is just of being cold for 6 months out of the year. And then there's no nutrition, and there's minimal nutrition. There's times you can't get out for a week at a time. So I understand winter quite well.
In Europe and in Japan and other northern places, the community is so important. Having harvest festivals is so important. Winter solstice so important. Counting down the days to when you first plant, because if you plant too soon, the buds freeze and you starve.
Yeah.
There are all these mistakes you can make as a community, and it ends, and then you starved, and then you were overrun.
Or you
by
died in conflict because somebody else was going to starve, and they came to take what you got.
Right. So
because you got it right.
But we've lost that, and I use the comparison all the time of fish in an aquarium. We think we're living in a real world, but a modern city is like a fish aquarium. Fish in the big fish tank think they're living in a real ecology, but they're not. Somebody pulls the plug, they all die.
And we've had this conversation.
Right.
The problem that we have is when it gets to that, you have to have something more cohesive, because there are very few communities that are both self-sufficient and defensible, truly defensible, even in the rural areas. You're going to have to rely upon a civilizational people who are willing to work with and help one another so that collectively you can survive.
Well, I think that the percentage of Americans that can survive if supply chains break down is going to be less than 10%. There are farming communities where, absent diesel fuel, chemicals, fertilizer, seeds, their output might go down 90%, and that's enough for them. That's enough for their zip code, not enough for the cities.
I want to be careful here, because I don't a gradient of scale, and I don't want to jump straight to everything's fucking collapsed and governments don't work and everything's a failure, etc. Because I don't think that's going to happen. Even if we actually take this fight on, some places are going to get it. Some states, some counties, some governments, because of the will of their people and the knowledge and skills of their people and their willingness to be ruthless to keep useless people out. Some places are going to get it. This is a huge country with extraordinary, we're not Somalia, we're not Ethiopia, we're not these other places that don't have immense capacities for self-sustainment. We do have it. And not everywhere is going to collapse. Even again, if
I don't think we have the social cohesion. There aren't enough.
And back to the bloody civilization thing again. That's the problem. This is exactly what.
If our cities are mosaics made up of shards of civilizations, when the
most of them are going to die. That's okay. So again,
I mean, if a Russian city that is 90% ethnic Russian knows how to deal when the supply chains break down, because they're calling their cousins and former contacts from the old times on landlines and putting together private deals, not private, but like this town is selling or trading.
They're
we literally got through years doing that. I think that very few communities in this country could do that, because our cities, all of our cities are now multi-ethnic. Look at
don't worry,
Los
I'm not
Angeles,
talking about the cities. I couldn't care less about the cities. They're going to be a trouble. You know what the problems you're going to have with the cities? And I worked with a certain very, very wealthy family, one of the wealthiest in the world. And we had this very conversation. We had this very conversation years ago, 5 years ago, with where they live. And they live next to one of the largest cities in the country. And tens of millions of people, 10-ish million or more, are going to try to come flooding out of that city. What are you going to do?
But our enemies, and we have numerous, aren't just going to be firing missiles over, the oceans at us.
Uh,
They
Come on,
understand
bro.
our
Come
weak.
on,
They
come on, come on,
understand
man.
all of our weak
Come on,
points.
come on, come on. The only enemies we have, they're going to be involved in this, are already here,
That's exactly what I mean.
right?
They know how to light the fuses on all of these pre-existing conditions. There's no need for them to do this with a navy or a missile force. We are so vulnerable. We're like kindling wood stacked up, dry
Not a
kindling wood.
defeatist. I'm not a defeatist. Listening to you, man, it's like we have no chance. No chance. And the one thing that I'm trying to articulate that can help us bind us together, because right up until about the last 20 years, these themes were taught in school and were in our movies and in our books and in most of our art. And 40 years ago, dominantly so. That's still there. All of it's still there. We've been increasingly, particularly over the last 10 years, kept it hidden from us. Who we are as a people is still there. Who we are as a civilization is riddled through everything. And we better wake up to it. We better wake the hell up to it soon, because we're going to have to work together. We're going to have to collaborate. We're going to have to be able to know who's one of us and who isn't, and who's trying to simulate being one of us but isn't. And the only way you can do that is to go back to a civilization, to the core civilizational roots, because Russia had very similar problems. And Russia had the United States, the United Kingdom, and Europe doing everything they could to destabilize the former Soviet Union.
But Russia had and has a core civilization. I don't
We
believe we
do as
have that
well.
anymore.
That's exactly what I'm saying, man. We do. It's right there. It's right there. They've tried really, really hard to stamp it out during the wokest really increasing over the last 10 years, but going back roughly 20 years. They've tried really hard to deny us the memory of it, the ability to see it and recognize it. This is what's happening in the United Kingdom. It's happening here, but it's still there.
Is it worse? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
Is it worse in Europe? Are they farther down the line than the United States
I couldn't
right
give
now?
fuck all about Europe. Fuck Europe. They're behind most of this. They're the ones whose banks are getting plussed up by the slavery, the criminal slavery here in the United States of the largest economy and wealthiest peoples in the world. Fuck Europe. The only ones I care about is the United Kingdom, because I have family there, and most of our families come from there or through there, and more importantly, because that's the heart of our civilization. Now, it's not the dominant force in it anymore, just like Byzantium became the most powerful force in the Roman Empire, starting with the Battle of Milvian Bridge and extending for another, well, up until about 1054 in the Schism, and then it gets a little hanky from there. So I couldn't care less about Europe. Let Europe deal with Europe. We're not European. We are English-speaking peoples. We are British. We are the English civilization. The United States was built on it, built out on it, fought over, has went home twice to go help the parents before. This time we're riddled through here in the United States. We got to fight, we got to take on here, but we've got to remember who the hell we are. We are not Europeans. We've been at war with Europe for 1,000 years. And many of Europe's people who are trying to flee Europe and that the European ways came here. Not so long ago. So it's still here. It's still deeply woven through everything. But with the internet, particularly social media, there was a possibility, a capability for them to use this shit, this wokish shit, to and the threat of Marxism and actual Marxist stuff, but goes way beyond Marxism, to pollute every bit of information, all the dialogue, all the discussions, all the entertainment, all the art, all the incentive structures, to pollute all of that, and in every form or fashion possible, deny us our own history and our own culture and civilization. That's obvious.
Well,
I mean, people, that's why they tear down statues, they change the names of things, all that. Why? Is to deny us our sense of our society and civilization, which is the immune system of a people. It is also the thing that when you take on the pathogens and you go to war, you have to have that immune system. You have to have the immune system processes and cells and the body's processes and cells working together as a collective community to fight that virulent pathogen or portfolio of pathogens.
Well, I think that if we are going to hold together, it's going to be at the state level, not the federal level.
Oh, it's community. I agree with that.
And I think that I agree with you.
Yeah.
Hold the torch, pass the torch to your children. But there are measurable metrics. I'm going back to the fox, wild fox to tame fox in a couple generations, which
We're
Europe
not
has
foxes. We're not foxes.
had. Okay.
We're human beings.
Our
are
testosterone, male testosterone, measurable.
testosterone can turn right back on.
A century chemically.
Literally, testosterone production under the right conditions can turn right back on.
The war that will be fought by men with half the testosterone of World War II men. Half.
Okay.
And self-identifying, high school kids today, self-identifying are something like 20% identifying as not heterosexual. You talk about the pollution is very deep. This isn't a father to a son passing the torch is great, and I laud it. But our society at this point is polluted, and history is full.
A lot of them are going to die. A lot of people are going to die.
History is full of low IQ hordes invading and taking over.
You're a defeatist, man. You're a defeatist.
Well, hope is not a plan.
This isn't hope. There is a plan.
Lollipops and rainbows, man.
Remind yourself of who you are. Get into the fucking fight. Go do the things you have to do to train your body physically to reproduce or to reinvigorate, instantiate testosterone production. Create incentive programs so that young men participate in that. Women support it. Otherwise, man, we're just from the things you're saying, we're all lost. We're done. It's over.
We're just 20 years behind South Africa. You can just right now tell the Boers and the English in South Africa, toughen up.
We might as well surrender.
It'll be fine.
Might as well surrender. Is that what you're saying?
But we're going to have to go into a lager period where we have to go to communities that are defensible.
Don't disagree. We're going through a bottleneck.
I've
said this before.
I think you guys are.
Hold on. How are we disagreeing if we're both agreeing that our cities are going to crash and burn?
Well, I think
that's going to be a majority of the population.
Hold on. I think you guys are agreeing more than disagreeing on this. I just think it's being communicated two different ways, if I may say. But what do I know? The only one listening to me is you two right now. So am I wrong by that assessment? I do want to move on to Ukraine and Russia here at some point, but go ahead.
It's fine.
No. We don't have to move on yet. But I think you guys. I feel like you guys are agreeing more.
Spun that out. I don't think. I think you can say realist Pollyanna, or you can say, Matt, you're defeatist, and I'm going to turn the whole ship around. I just think I'm more realistic. You see it as defeatist. I see you as Pollyanna. We're going to suddenly rebirth the English culture.
Watch it thinking you know who I am or what I'm talking about.
Hope is not a plan. Hope is not a plan.
Do not make such accusations.
Okay, well, you called me a defeatist about 10 times.
Was that not what you were saying? That there's no chance? That some small number of people are going to survive? We don't have a chance? That it's too late?
We're both agreeing that cities are going to crash and burn, and you say you don't care. You don't care about Europe or our cities.
I don't, because I can't.
You don't see that as a huge defeat for America?
No. We're going through a bottleneck. We have to survive it. That means we have to remember who we are. We have to stand to and fight. I can't save millions of people who cannot fight for themselves.
My goal is to get as many people as possible through the bottleneck.
Well, I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
But I'm not going to sit here
throwing around defeatist when you've already said 90% of the cities are going to be dead. I would call you a defeatist.
I didn't say that. I never said 90% of the
cities are going to crash and burn. What do you think that is in percentages?
Yes, and a lot of communities.
What is a bottleneck to you? What's a bottleneck? What percentage?
All right, now you're quibbling a point.
No, I'm not quibbling. You said you don't care about Europe. They can crash and burn.
I don't. No. I said Europe needs to take care of it. They can, if that's what happens. Europe has to take care of Europe. Europe is not my responsibility.
What happens to Europe?
I don't.
Okay.
At this point, I can't.
So you're a defeatist. See,
How
you're throwing
the fuck am I a
term around. You're throwing
defeatist,
the
man?
term.
Who the fuck is Europe that I should care about?
hold on,
You're throwing the term at me, man.
hold on.
No. I care about my family. I care about your family. You're here in this country. Our families might actually have to support one another at some point, way more close than anybody in Europe. Let Europe deal with Europe. I'm not going to send my kids to go fight for Europe as they go through this problem. We need our kids here. We have to go through this here. Maybe we get through it.
Fight for England again.
We shouldn't right now. I said that. We have to get our own home in order. And if we get our own home, as I said, if we get our home in order, then there's a good chance we go back home to our parents' house and get that in order too. But we have to get our own house in order first.
But you see a bottleneck coming.
I do.
And that's not defeatist.
No. I'm articulating things that we can do to help stimulate ourselves to prepare for a fight and, yes, save as many as we can.
My goal in
But that's not what you're articulating. What you're articulating is testosterone levels and it's too late.
My goal and your goal is to get as many people through the bottleneck as possible.
I agree with that.
Let me get in here a second. I kind of want to move on from this because I feel like we're going in circles. But I do think, as an observer of all this, you guys do not disagree on where this is going and what the best strategy and what the best approach is. Yeah. Is it fair for me to say that? Just simple answers from both of you guys, real quick.
Sure.
Right,
yeah,
Matt?
I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
So I was trying to make one specific point about what allows for the cohesiveness necessary for us to overcome, very much, Matt, to your point, the limitations that are there. Very real. Your limitations are articulated very, very real and obvious. But there is at least something we can do to give ourselves a better fighting chance, and that is to remember who we are, that we knew not so very long ago, before all this social media and all this attempt to try and deny us the recognition of who we are. That's the only thing I was trying to articulate, because it can substantively help. It helped very much, as you articulated, the Russians. It's helped the Chinese more than once. Right? 15, 16, 17 times in their very long history. We need to do it ourselves. And I'm 100% with you, man. We got to get through as many as we can.
And the end result, as we go through this bottleneck, again, I'm posing this as a question of both of you. The end result as we go through this bottleneck, right? Bottleneck, right? Am I getting the word right?
Yeah. Bottleneck.
Bottleneck. As we go through this bottleneck, it's gonna result in a lot of people losing their lives potentially if this occurs. Not that we're calling for this.
If it happens,
right?
If it happens,
right.
Yeah.
But also the what you guys are both conveying here is that you agree where potentially is going to go and what the best solutions are. Even knowing that you can't save every city, most of the major cities are going to have their own.
I will say this. I don't know what the best solutions are, because very much what Matt's saying, that's going to be community dependent. That's going to be locally dependent.
And you won't know until it starts.
Supply chains and being near your local food sources and water sources is going to be very important if there's a period of a disrupted supply chain.
And your ability to protect all of that and secure all of that. And your ability to not let empathy be weaponized so that you let the enemy in to feed the enemy. You know, how many communities have been killed because 4 or 5 guys stumbled in from the dark and asked to sit at fire and eat some of the food. And then when everybody's asleep, they slit the guard's throat and let in their buddies to kill everybody. Right? Yeah. So the who are we, what are we is absolutely essential thing, because it helps us with that. Who gets to come out of the night and sit at the fire? And how do we assess, are they somebody that should be sat there, or do we kill them before we go to sleep so they don't slit our throats?
And it's no coincidence that both in Europe and the USA, too many empathetic women in positions of power
and effeminate men. Yeah.
They believe in opening the gates of the city to the whole world.
They'll let them all sit down at the fire, and then get upset with us when they say, let's go to bed. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to sleep till that motherfucker's sitting there.
Yeah, there's a reason why successful civilizations throughout society, throughout history, with a few exceptions, allowed women to be in positions of power.
Correct.
Because of the maternal instinct can be weaponized.
Yes.
Their maternal instinct can be turned against the larger society.
Yeah.
Can't save, you
Ironically,
can't save everybody.
Ironically,
Yeah.
to both of you, I was watching some Ayn Rand on Phil Donahue last night, and those old episodes from the '70s. Man, I don't know if you've ever, I don't know, even I've talked about this, but EM and I were discussing, and one of the audience members, you remember Phil Donahue used to run around?
Sure.
And it was in a bigger venue where they had her, so he was like all over the place. But she was asked the question, could you ever vote for a woman who's for president? And she said, absolutely not. And the woman said, what if it's the best, that's the best candidate? She said, well, that means we've sunken very, very low. She said, commanding the army? Are you crazy?
Nukes. How many millions have been killed in
Europe,
Ukraine right now by 3 women?
In Europe, and you can see this from, a female lieutenant all the way up. There's a need to prove that you're as tough as the guys. And if that means I'm willing to send even more people into the meat grinder than the guys, I'm going to do that because I've got to prove that I'm as tough as the guys.
Yeah, we see it in
and that's very dangerous when they're in charge of militaries.
We see it in the same studies done of female CEOs. Far more likely to fire people, even people with long-term track records, successful, etc.
To prove they're as tough.
Prove they're as tough as the guys.
Same
with effeminate men as well.
Actually, I never thought of it that way. It makes sense though. What did you guys both think of Zelensky at the White House last week and where we're at now? Minerals deal is on, off.
I never believed in the minerals deal. I think that was a fig leaf.
80% of the minerals aren't real, and 80% that do exist are in the 4 oblasts that voted to become part of Russia.
It's just a PC way of setting up an American tripwire outside of NATO and Article 5. Once we have our KBR mining companies there, Russia won't dare to fire at us. I think it was the whole deal was set up to fail. I think that essentially it was a way of putting the blame onto Zelensky instead of Trump and Vance. I think that they took the opportunity to set him up to fail.
I agree.
So he can be scapegoated as the reason for no deal. But the whole rare earth in Ukraine thing is BS.
Oh, Russia said it.
Can you move closer to your mic? Can you move closer?
Yeah.
The only rare the metal that's in the soil of Ukraine now is expended ordnance, and it's a lot of it's UXO that's going to be blowing people up for years. These cluster bomblets.
Yeah, we worked on for the Buffetts. We worked on drone-based counter IAD or counter UXO.
But it's going to be a problem for a long time.
Yeah, it's going to take 50, 70 years.
You're not going to want to be plowing through there for a while.
Here's what I can't, what I'm trying to figure out, because we put Zelensky in there in 2019.
He's expendable. He was always expendable.
So what happens now? Because he's saying, I'm not going to negotiate with Russia. I mean, where do you guys see this going?
If you remember back, I think it was in when they went to Turkey for that round of negotiations, and there were hints that he was coming out as being favored. This is before Boris Johnson totally blew it up, but there were stories coming out that Zelensky was favorable towards the I'm not sure if they were being called Ankara Accords at that time. The whole thing failed, but one of his leading lieutenants was murdered by his bodyguards. One of his diplomats. I've got to go back and study it, but a leader can be controlled. Obviously, you're watching social media and world television, but you're to a great extent controlled by the 20 people you're in daily contact with, that actually see you, that are actually in the bunker with you, on the airplane with you. And if those 20 guys are Azov fanatics that will cut your throat the minute you make a deal, the way that his own bodyguards murdered the diplomat in Turkey, or I forget if it was on the way to Turkey, but a diplomat that was saying yeah, well, there's some real potential with this deal. that diplomat was killed by his bodyguards. So these are the same bodyguards that are guarding Zelensky. Zelensky is not a free agent to say and do whatever he wants. I'm sure he's getting the silver out of, a lot of money is going offshore. But I think he understands that, if he doesn't toe the line of the 20 quote unquote bodyguards around him, they'll cut his throat in a second.
He'll never spend any of that money. It's not the way the game's played.
Yeah, there's no safe exit for him.
That's not the way the game's played. He'll be a burnt corpse in a bunker somewhere at some point with his wife.
They're not going. So people look at this as if everybody looks at other situations through their own local lens. Like, well, what if Marco Rubio compared to John Bolton? What would they think? These are our own lenses. But if you're really, looking at Ukraine right now, and you think, wait a minute, the 20 guys that are in daily contact with Zelensky will murder him the second he signs a peace deal, because they're hardcore Azovites. They are bitter enders. They will fight until there's, like in the last suburb of Lviv, they will never sign away Crimea or 1 inch.
They will not stop fighting even when the war is totally lost and Ukraine is destroyed. They will continue to fight. This is the same people that have been fighting since 1939.
And Zelensky is their mouthpiece and their face to the world. But he is in no way a free agent to make these decisions.
He's been dead the moment he agreed to it. The moment he didn't, and I don't know if he was smart enough to get a whiff of it, but beyond a certain point, he was already a dead man walking. And now it's just a matter of how long he can keep walking. And if it wasn't clear, I mean, his diplomat that was killed by his bodyguards is about as clear as it needs to be. Yeah.
So I don't think that there's any chance I think that Trump is on the right track cutting off intel, because they can't steer the rockets without the intel.
Correct.
It's not just a course and a trajectory. It's giving you a complete electronic warfare picture of it's much more than just aiming the rocket.
Yeah.
To get the rocket to the target. So cutting that off and no more HIMARS, et cetera, means he's on borrowed time. I think that eventually the Russians are not going to go for any kind of a ceasefire. It was ridiculous. He said, let's have a ceasefire on everything in the air.
No.
We're losing, so let's have a ceasefire. I think that it's going to go to the Dnieper River, and I think that the Russians are going to take Odessa. Odessa may be part of a final negotiated settlement, but what happened in 2014 with the trade union building, number one, the statue of Catherine the Great there that was pulled down. She founded Odessa. It's a Russian city. It's, their main port on the Baltic, the Black Sea. But when they burned the trade unionists alive, that's a very searing memory in the Russian mind. These people on fire jumping out of a building, that we did that. That was us doing that to Russia. So not taking Odessa will be very difficult. It would be like having, not rebuilding a building at 9/11. I mean, it would just leave that as a whole. It's not finished. It's not finished till the Russians are in Odessa. So I think they're going to talk, but I think they're going to keep moving forward. But it's been a brilliant strategy to just bleed them, to just bleed the Ukrainians.
Warfare. I have a question for you, because it's something that's been coming up in my mind here of late with the Europeans and the Nazis that are still amongst the European peoples. Were I in the situation the Europeans are in, led by who they're led, insane people, I might create the situation, since the Americans have not bitten on any of the other things to get them involved, where I create a situation where Russia has to go destroy Ukraine and move into Europe just to defend itself.
Russia has gone all the way to Paris before. People forget. 1945 was not the first time that the Russians were in France.
Yeah.
As part of something. But if it gets to that point, we're going to be in a whole new world order by then. But the treason, the absolute treachery of European leaders letting in millions of Mohammedans it's just unfathomable. I mean, after the gates of Vienna, all of the battles from the Spanish, the conquest and reconquest of Spain, all the way through 1,000 years of trying to keep the Muslims out of Europe, to invite them in by the millions.
Here's my thought.
It's such a supreme act of treachery.
My thought is they drive the ethnic peoples of Europe to such fear, legitimate fear, that we replicate 1930s Germany, where we put all these people in camps and use them up, kill them as slave labor to help rebuild the economy, rearm Europe, force rearm Europe in order to take on the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians. I don't know that it'll work this time.
I saw that.
But
I don't think that's feasible. I think that at this point, no matter what, Europe is in for a bloody civil war, because there's a critical mass of Mohammedans, and if you just hand them an AK-47, they already know what to do with it, compared to your average tight jeans wearing German man who is, to me, his grandfather was a fox, but he's a Pomeranian, and he's not going to get up to speed fast enough. History is full of high advanced cultures that were wiped out by a force of jihadists that were like a meat cleaver attacking Jello.
Do you see that? Do you see with the taking the illegals and putting them in camps? Do you see that happening in the United States? Yeah.
Yes.
See, I can't.
I don't see that it'll happen. So, Dave and whatever his name,
Jim,
when you brought
counselor.
this up, right? It's like, no, it's like, well,
why can't it? Wait, hold on before you finish it. Your volume's down a little bit. Are you getting too far away from your mic?
No, I don't know. Okay.
There you go.
Resentfuls are running 15 different lines, different parts of them, different groups. There's human nature. And so you let that stuff run out because you don't know which one you're going to need and if it's going to succeed and all of the pushback and all of the variables. But this is one that was used in the last century. It worked. I mean, ultimately, the Nazis won. Germany was defeated. The Nazis just metastasized. Right? Great documentary here recently called The Fourth Reich and how Nazi money is funding a lot of Europe's corporations and created. Is it something that will happen? Well, we can't know that, but it is something that has happened. The concept and idea that these things can't happen is ludicrous because they have.
Well, and if because the cities are where most of the action will be, the cities fight, supply chains will then break down.
Yes.
Supply chains break down, there's a bottleneck. On the other end of the bottleneck, the survivors are going to be completely different than what went into the bottleneck.
Yes.
In my last book, this book, which ends in Texas, the survivors of that bottleneck are going to say, if you can't speak English and show proof that you own where you're living right now, we're not asking twice. The deportation is right into the ground.
Yes.
So it's going to be a very harsh reality on the other side of a bottleneck. There won't be women in charge of the military.
No.
At any level.
No.
There just won't be.
Nor effeminate men.
It's going to be a very, very harsh reality. And this book and this book I'm going to put on Kindle free runs. So
awesome.
But it's going to be a very different world on the other side of a bottleneck. I don't see how there's going to be, say, a mass deportation program. Michael Jan's been talking about ships. The Darien Gap is pretty much closed, but now people are hopping on boats from Colombia up past, up through Central America. And he's talking about we need to reverse that, load them onto ships and just say, Colombia, you're taking them. I don't see that happening. I think that it may a little bit, but if 20 million people came in the last 4 years, we'd need to deport something like, 10,000 per day. I don't see that happening. Per
So
day, every day. That's what
I
was
look
coming
at
over the
this,
border.
I look at this patterns and longer term, right? Your economy's beyond bankrupt. You're not going to have the collateral. You're not going to be able to rebuild 30 years from now. You start flooding the country with cheap labor that you're going to enslave. You're going to repeat a pattern from the last century that worked. You're going to feed the concept and idea into your everyday citizen that we need to reduce the population or we're all going to die because of climate change or
Even though that may not have been the conscious paradigm
correct,
and you were
correct.
bringing them in,
Yeah,
it may have been the liberal faculty lounge
correct. You
mentality
let
that
them
brought
do
them
it. Yeah,
in.
you let them do that, right? But
But
you've
at the end
got,
of it, they're going to
yeah,
be working on the farm.
correct. So that's the way resentfuls work, is they're not sitting there in some master plans, working out master plans. What they're doing is they're very, very good at benefiting from, seeing where things might benefit them, right? Like sociopaths and psychopaths, and then letting that happen, helping that. Never quite
Yeah.
knowing, you might use it, you might not use it, right? We'll figure that out later, but these people are not so good at planning, but they are unbelievably good at making things work for them.
Yeah. In Doomsday Reef, the after the bottleneck, this is the 10 years after the end of the world as we knew it. So
Yeah.
it's not like a Perry disaster. This is post.
Mm.
There is no federal government, there is no Federal Reserve, there is no paper money, and labor is a form of currency. If you want to be fed, you are going to have to essentially volunteer for indentured servitude, because in the absence of mechanized farm labor, diesel to run tractors, etc., it's going to be a row of people in a field again. And that did feed the South. There were no diesel tractors in antebellum, the South, but the South had rich farmland. Horses didn't require a gas station, and that will return. If there's more
Well,
people than food, then people are going to be on a line with a hoe.
Is this though what we spent the last 90 plus minutes talking about? I think to myself, and I come back to the conversation that I had with Matt Smith, and I know you both have listened to it, and even though a couple of weeks have passed since we spoke, and I encourage people that haven't listened to it yet to go back and tune into it, because I find it fascinating. People still aren't really talking about that out in the mainstream media.
That's probably your highest views.
But this will be now. This YouTube will be my highest views now.
But I mean that Matt Smith one went also on YouTube because of Doug Casey and reposting it over on YouTube.
Yeah, I got a lot of traffic. And then Matt did a summary of it. And I haven't looked at it in a while, but it had gotten over 5 million views on X, his summary of our conversation and what he was talking about. But
yeah,
are we at the point?
Yeah, Glenn Beck reposted it, things like that.
That's right. Oh, yeah.
wow.
It's amazing the agave of this social media stuff. Like I woke up in the morning, I saw Glenn Beck, and I text Matt. I go, "Oh my God, Glenn Beck! He just reposted your." And I'm like, "Look at me! I'm like an 18-year-old getting sucked into all this." But anyway, sorry, side note. But does all this, to me, we are at the end of the debt-laden system, and they need this conflict, they need this war to, deflect or distract from what the real problems are.
Burn all the paper.
They need to, in contract law, in all contracts going back, several thousand years, there's a force majeure clause. And you have to have some sufficient cataclysm that lasts 4 or 5 years at least, so that you can activate enough of those force majeure clauses to abrogate, in this case, tens of millions, if not several billion contracts.
So it's the Jubilee via war.
Correct.
And a bottleneck.
Yeah.
And it's the period, it's the part of the movie where the poker table gets thrown over, the lights go out, there's gunshots.
Yeah.
And at the end, everybody's horse riding away.
Yeah. So I don't, first off, Matt, I meant no disrespect. All right. So I got a little heated there, but I
no problem.
Respect your work a lot.
That's good. People are going
and
to
I-
listen. People are going to listen to this. That's good.
And I've spoken to some other guys about you that knew you when you served, et cetera. They all speak
Yeah,
very
we-
highly of you.
Yeah. And that was in no way contrived, folks. This was not kayfabe wrestling.
No.
Pulling the plug out now.
No. Your ancestry is German, is it? Germanic?
No, it's partly. It's mostly it's Irish, English, and French, and a little German.
I got you. Okay. Well, it was the Scottishman in me, the half Scot.
Nobody wants to
I
hear
might-
people agreeing
I
anyway.
might have to put this behind a paywall for a day just to
Nobody
entice
wants to
people
hear
to
people
listen.
agreeing
Entice
all the
people to
time.
listen to this.
Here's my sense though, right? Is that yes, very much to what you're articulating could very well happen if we don't remember who we are, remember how to organize, or look at our own past and history, get through this last 20 years of just sheer noise that's denied us that. I do believe, and I am no Pollyanna, I've spent 20 some odd years in tech, 40 years in tech. I've spent 25 years in finance, spent 11 years in special forces. I look at these things quite substantially. I'm working in the medical space now because it's a major issue we're going to have to deal with, is getting people healthy rather than just providing healthcare and medical. There is a path forward where we do go through a bottleneck, but it's not a 20% come out the other side. It's a 80% or 70% come out the other side bottleneck. A good portion of that is going to be reorganizing, restructuring, realigning. One thing we cannot forget, and I'm very much with you, we have a massive, very real, very ugly fight ahead of us here at home. But it doesn't need to be collapse, and it doesn't need to lead to collapse. Not only because can we do this? Yes, if we can remember who and what we are, those of us that are that, and we are still the dominant force in this country. As well, neither Russia nor China, they've already been through their collapse. They've already been through their bottlenecks. And not only that, they're on the ups, firmly on the upswing on the other side.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
neither of them want to. And once we take the boot off the neck of the Persians and the Iranians, they will also finally come through their bottleneck of the 1970s, and they will also resurge. Now, they're nowhere near as powerful and never will be as Russia or China. But the point I'm getting to is
They invented chess, and they make their own drones and rockets.
they're brilliant peoples, and
They
they're
don't
very good
need
at
to bring
finance.
engineers in from Europe to build
Correct.
a building.
No. They're brilliant minds. So point being is that neither Russia nor China is facing this problem. They're firmly on the upswing. Their civilizations are restored. They're going to go unless we nuke the hell out of them, which God, I pray we don't. Point being is that both of those will be massive forces out there in the world, and neither one of them wants to see the United States fail because of the destabilization, the nukes, 100%. Everything. If the United States fails, it is the actual same reason why Russia was able, despite everything we did after the fall of the Soviets, didn't disintegrate. It was because while there were forces trying to dominate and control, and the same with China, there were other forces that were like the worst thing that could happen is Russia breaks apart. The worst thing that could happen because of the nukes that would get loose, this conflict would happen all over. There would be nonstop. So neither Russia nor China want to see the United States, disintegrate, collapse. Neither one of them want to get involved though, because then we blame it on them, and maybe we get this shit turned around and we do go nuke on them, right? So they need to.
I see Trump. When Rubio's talk with Megyn Kelly, where he laid out his, the unipolar world is over.
Yeah.
Or, most of history, there was no unipolar world.
Yeah.
And Trump talking about Greenland and Panama tells me he wants to be a strong force in our hemisphere and let Russia figure out Ukraine, which was never a country before the breakup of the USSR. Correct. It's not our business.
Correct.
Let Russia figure that out. Let's find a way to work together again. He's already
Yeah.
Met Chairman Z, and I think
Yeah.
they get along. I think they understand each other.
Yeah.
The right man at the right place. We may have in Putin, Z, and Trump, we may have the right people finally, that
Yes.
can get us through this minefield.
I
I
agree.
sure hope so.
I agree.
And who knows? We may come through a stronger on the other end when the faculty lounge is no longer running the country because they can't. They've run us into the ground.
Well, what's running us and them is this mob state, and the mob state has to go. It has to go. That's the real fight because we can, realign globally, we can reposition globally, we can do all that right, and we'll still collapse. We'll still go through the concerns that you've articulated because of the criminality
Yeah,
alone
the
and
the
the
Chinese have
corruption.
never the
Mhm.
Chinese and Japanese, I don't know if it's an Asian characteristic, they never really did any deep atonement after Second World War for the Japanese or after Cultural Revolution, Thousand Flowers,
Yeah,
famines
yeah.
in China. They still have Mao pictures up in China, but the Germans may have overdone it on the self-flagellation, you know,
So the
essentially
Chinese,
turning
there,
nationalism into a sin.
there's an interesting comment in China that's coming out of China is that the reason the photos of Mao are still up is not because there isn't the recognition, but because there are still people who lived through that that were the Chinese to say that was all wrong, it would destabilize, instead of transitioning and not repeating that wrong and doing as much as they can to bring people's standards of living up and safety and security and all of that, that to state, yes, we did wrong, that was all wrong, would destabilize China at the time when it's actually, starting to really stand on its own feet, particularly now that it's kicked American investment bankers and everybody out. So we're not
And
doing
they're
the China
producing and
hustle.
they're producing 20 engineers for Air One,
Correct.
but and
Correct.
not stupid people. But the
No.
other the other where I was kind of going also was it might help for the United States to in terms of getting rid of the gangster government, the what do you call it, the
The mob
mafia
state,
state,
the mob
mob
state. Yeah,
state, a little bit of a truth telling about everything from JFK on,
I agree.
all of these color
Yeah,
revolutions.
I agree.
You know, the British Empire, one of the things I've read, I forget who makes this point. You can have a beautiful democracy at home and be a brutal tyrant
Yes.
abroad.
Yes. Yeah.
And America uh, does not have a great reputation in a lot of the world because we just took over every government that we didn't like and cooed them
Yeah.
and
I've
maintained that.
I have seen this in, very wealthy families, very successful men, self-made men, very successful, big softy at home with the family, absolutely ruthless with everybody in business.
Yeah, Confessions of an Economic Hitman,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the economic hitman was working hand in glove with the government. They were on the same team,
Yeah.
financially benefiting and benefiting
Yeah.
the deep state. But and meanwhile, back at home, we just think we're a force for good around the world. And I think that some coming clean would be a big help.
Yeah.
The sun just dropped below an eve, and it's like in the 5 degrees between an eve and the trees. That's that's why I'm suddenly in a spotlight
It's
here.
like we switched you to interrogation mode.
I have to
Mike, get
go.
your questions in. He's
Yeah.
under,
Well,
yeah.
Yeah.
either I've got to go close the Venetian blinds across the room, but I think it's rolling up on 6, so I think it's a good time to
Well, let me.
wrap.
Oh, go ahead, man. Yeah, I was just gonna say. First of all, well, Ian, tell people where they can find you.
Twitter is the best. EM Burlingame. Azrome Burns, the novel I'm writing where I'm going into these things in more detail is emburlingame.substack.com.
As Rome burns.
Azrome Burns, the
When's that
novel
coming
in there.
out?
I'm releasing it as a serial because what I'm trying to do is, take the conversations we're having, when somebody's trying to work, when I think there's a theme that's riddled throughout all these conversations where everybody's trying to get to this thing, then I write a chapter around it.
Is that on Kindle, or how are you releasing it?
No, it's on Substack and
Oh,
Medium.
Substack. Okay.
Yeah, Substack and Medium. So I'm going back to the old novel, 1920s, 30s way, 1800s, and releasing as a chapter well, right now I'm trying to do a chapter a week, but I got to start writing again.
So yeah, me too. And I've got to do this audiobook. That's why I've got this fuzzy stuff up instead of the.
Yeah.
But yeah, my books are on Amazon, also in Kindle and Audible format. But if you want these printed versions, if you get them directly from me, then it works out for me. And
Awesome.
its postage is such a big part of actually mailing these things now that the postage drops very steeply as the package gets heavier. So for three or more of the books, then I'll go a pretty deep discount on the books, because the postage just kills you on one book. It costs more for the postage than the book. Anyway, that's internal,
So
home
can they get
business
that at a
kind of thing.
website that you have, or?
Yeah, Enemies Foreign and Domestic. I'm also on Kindle on X and on Substack under my own name, Matt Bracken 48 on Kindle. But these books, a couple of them are going to be on a Kindle free run, so tomorrow you can download them. And if you don't have a Kindle, I really do recommend it, because almost everything before approximately the Second World War is out of copyright.
Yeah.
So the Kindle free library is like an unbelievable resource that you can download pretty much anything pre-World War II for zero, and just carry it with you.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate this. I have to tell you, I was going to say this offline, but I think it's better to say it on here. Hour and 51 minutes. This conversation flew by like 20 minutes.
It did.
Yeah.
And I'd love to do it again if you guys are both interested and available. So
Certainly.
Okay.
Certainly. And I won't be so Pollyannish next time.
I'll try not to be so defeatist.
It's a deal.
In 5 minutes, the sun's going to go down and I'll be back in the dark.
All right.
thanks, guys.
All right.
Mic drop.
All right, guys.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks.